So Evelyn is a lecturer in the Department of Media and Culture Studies at the University of Utrecht. And her work has focused on temporalities and politics of digital culture. Her work is very interdisciplinary in nature, and it straddles media and performance studies, gender and post-colonial theory, as well as legal and policy research. So I'm really excited about Evelyn's talk, and I'm going to switch off my camera now.
Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to start up my PowerPoint. Yes, I believe you're seeing this all right. So hi, everybody. Good afternoon from Utrecht. It's already 12 here. Really happy to be participating in this symposium. And I'm going to talk a bit about my research, and I hope you find this interesting. So let me start off with a 1-minute countdown. And I would like you in this 1 minute to mentally review your day so far. So if you're tuning in from further east, you might have a longer day. You might have already had a longer day. Some of you might have just rolled out of bed. Some of you might have already, had a jog, had a coffee or two, took your dog for a walk, maybe. So this 1 minute, it's for you to think about what time you got up and all the things you did until you landed here today at this symposium. So in this last minute, we've counted down and have gone through a bit of a mental journey together, tracking how we have landed in this shared time and space virtually on Zoom, this platform. And what we have performed in a way is a kind of being together, a kind of synchronization of our experiential time. This past minute, giving attention to the fact that we're currently together here at this event. So the time is now 11:04 GMT, according to my device. So synchronization is not only this kind of experiential experience where we're all kind of going through together, but synchronization is also an act of standardization. And here we can see a clear example of us being synchronized together through the standard clock time where we are together online, looking at the screen together. So standardization and synchronization kind of comes together, and time is a very important dimension of my work. And so I wanted to start off there to kind of flag out how we could use time to think about liveness, the theme of the symposium, and also kind of our relationship to technology. So clocks are always running in the background. And in my understanding or in my theorization about technology, algorithms are sort of the new clocks, which are also continuously running in the background. So here, I would like to give you a bit of a primer, a bit of a summary of what happened just now in order for our devices to actually be able to be on Zoom together, right? And there is a very important protocol in the TCP/IP suites, right? The internet protocol layer called the network time protocol. And it's actually pretty complex. So your computer, as a client computer, sends requests for the current time from a network time protocol server with a registration of its own time. So your computer has its own time, and it sends this information to this server. And the server adds the time of its time, right, back to the client, back to you. And then your computer will process the time that has lapsed between your computer and the server. So this signal is sent back and forth between your computer and the server. So let's say here, the Zoom server, right? In order to understand this delay, and then you can, through this calculation, your computer can adjust itself to the data that is being sent and the time that is on the server right now. So having this kind of protocol, this back and forth, prevents, your email being received before it is being sent, right? That is not possible with the time packets that are being sent back and forth in order to understand how the clocks within your computers actually communicate with servers. So if that was a little complex and you kind of have to wrap your head around it, that is totally normal. And it just goes to show how intricate, in fact, these algorithmic processing happening beneath our attention actually is, right? So we're not aware all the time of all these calculations that are happening in the background, and these algorithms, right, make sure that it's processed smoothly, right? If there's a glitch, and we experienced already some glitches, and maybe you continue to experience glitches throughout the day with this streaming and the live feed. Without these glitches, we won't even notice, right? If it's all smooth, it just happens in the background and it all goes happily, right? And another example, of course, is, for instance, if you're using a Bluetooth headphones, right? There is a constant syncing between your devices, and all of these just happens without us really noticing. And there are a lot of these synchronization protocols happening within the way our gadgets function. And they all have to function based on certain standardizations. And that standardization that I'm interested in particularly is with time. But this standardization that happens on the computational level is not actually synchronized to our experiential time. So if you look at media scholar Mark Hansen's work in his book, Feed Forward, he talks about this idea of 21st century media. So denoting the kind of media devices that we have today with this internet connected devices mostly. So he contrasts this with media from the 19th and 20th century, which is represented by photography and film. So with photographs, with film, these are still like media objects which attempt to synchronize with our perception, right? A photograph, a snapshot of a moment, something that we also see and experience. But with 21st century media, it's not possible. So everything happens on this, what he calls this micro-temporal scales without any necessary, let alone any direct connection to human sense perception and conscious awareness. So this is very much a post-human take on time, where the time layer just functions on a completely different level that we're unable to pay attention to, because they only take a fraction of a second or even a microsecond, a nanosecond. So we could think about this as sort of the liveness of algorithmic time, a time that happens with its own reality. So Wolfgang Ernst, who's a German media theorist, discusses this in his book Chronopoetics, and he talks about the fact that computers generate their own layer of temporal reality. So this is the kind of wordplay that he was thinking about, where indeed he talks about how basically like in a system, right, these different gadgets and devices talk to each other, and it creates a certain rhythm of how one process requires multiple devices, and it goes, and in order for this whole process to take place, every machine or every part of the machine needs to kind of synchronize to a particular rhythm, and they create their own rhythms within the processing. And this is a layer of reality that we have no access to. And he also talks about this in terms of time criticality. So everything that is time critical is things that we don't notice. So as I was saying, like you only notice the glitches, right? If let's say the streaming goes on in a very smooth manner, then we're not going to pay specific attention to the fact that there are all these processes happening underneath. But the moment a glitch happens, then you can notice that, oh, this actually is kind of disrupting our experiential layer of time. So this is a time really that is inaccessible, that is out of sync with the liveness of experiential or phenomenological or human time even. And it's very different in kind from the type of 1 minute countdown that we did together. So what happens, right, in this liveness of algorithmic time? So this is something that we all know already. Data is being captured, data is being processed, it's being output. And Mark Hansen refers to this as a kind of feed-forward mechanism, because the data is already processed and we only see kind of the output. We cannot really follow phenomenologically like what happens in the process of calculation, but we only see the output. So it's kind of jumps in speed and time. So it actually is a feed forward rather than a kind of feedback mechanism where you can expect a kind of back and forth. But here, actually the data is processed faster than we could even notice that they are being processed. So really, the idea is that consciousness, like our human consciousness, arrives too late on the scene. So before we even made aware, the location has already been pinged, it's already been sent to a server somewhere. Maybe your sleep habits have already been logged based on what time you start using your phone and what time you stop using your phone. Just the fact that you keep your phone in your pocket actually might mean that the steps you've taken in a day have been calculated. So all of these things happen sort of like on this machinic level, on this specific layer of time that you don't really notice. And I mean, what is all of this data for, right? So kind of from the perspective of the humanities and social sciences, we've been very critical of datafication and the ability of companies to capture our data for all sorts of purposes. And this has been this ongoing critique that we're seeing in the past few years. Technology reveals a kind of version of yourself that is a kind of data double, digital double that we can see. So someone is not just your phenomenological self, but really the self that is composed of all of these data points that are collected about us. And from this perspective, we could understand this as a form of algorithmic governance when the multiple levels of the self are used, are monitored or controlled through continuous data gathering and processing. So there are many aspects where this critique has already popped up. So here, just sort of some examples of like your physical body, right, with the quantified self movement, with sort of e-health initiatives, mental health as well, something that I will talk a little bit more about. Your hireability, right, based on your data, they could kind of determine whether your personality traits, for instance, which is something that they use with like psychometrics. So you can think of like an example from IBM's Watson, this machine learning algorithm that, for instance, processes your Twitter feed in order to determine, based on your word usage and your frequency of word usage and other metadata, determine what kind of person you are, and creating a profile on you just based on that. Similarly, loan credits, right, using your data, your digital footprint in order to determine whether you're someone who is trustworthy, feeding then personalized ads to you. And then there's also kind of new developments with facial recognition where they like capture your face and then determine whether you're lying or not. So it's a kind of new polygraph that they can use just by looking at your face and linking that to various data points. So here there is an underlying assumption that the data captured can reveal things that we are consciously unaware of, and that this data is more valuable perhaps than what we could consciously perceive. And thereby, this accords power to technological capture, perhaps in a way that is at the expense of our somatic bodily awareness. But this is not all bad. So I was thinking that maybe some of us want to use this gadget, for instance. So I don't know if you could guess what this is, but this is clearly a wearable that you can use either as a necklace or a clip. You can hide it, you can show it. I've been shown many targeted ads for this particular product in the past years, based on my my interest in well, quantified self technologies, wearables, and I could review what this gadget is for. It is very similar to this one. It is a posture tracking device. So I can imagine that many of us during this pandemic times being cooped up in our rooms, looking at screens and computers might actually find this very helpful. It's a gadget that you could wear that would kind of usually give you a buzz or some sort of ping to tell you that your alignment is wrong, that you're sitting maybe in the wrong position, and that is to give you a kind of feedback mechanism or feed forward mechanism so that you could adjust the way you sit. So this data that is collected on our bodies is sort of very much synchronized, real time, and we outsource our somatic awareness of how we're sitting, how we're standing, right, to this technology. The time that we take for introspection, the time that we take to build this self-awareness is actually undercut by the calculation of this little device, right, that can feed forward our bodily data, perhaps in a way that we trust this more than ourselves, because we need this little gadget to tell us how we're standing and whether we're standing in the right place. So some of you might be actually shifting in your seats right now, being kind of alerted to this idea of your bodily posture, and it's quite interesting that this is used and this is sort of promoted as a really good tool, right, to help prevent back pain. And in my research, I know that some companies actually also purchase this as a kind of corporate package, and they hand it out to their staff. And you can imagine that this might be quite helpful for frontline staff who are working as sales, right, in certain department stores, right, to make sure that their employees stand up straight, right, represent the brand properly, and they're not like slouching throughout the day. So on one hand, this is really great in terms of having a device that will help you prevent your back pain. But on the other, this is really an opportunity for intervention, really on a very bodily level, in the form of disciplining. So part of my work is about updating Michel Foucault's work on biopolitics. And what is very interesting in this kind of excursion into the historical dimension of this was that I was thinking about the role of statistics and the role of data, and how actually none of this is new. What is new is perhaps the way that it's done, right? The intensity of how it is done. But at the end of the day, collecting data is not new. So if you look at the work by Michel Foucault and Ian Hacking, they studied 18th to 19th century Europe, and they saw the birth of statistics as a science. They tried to understand how statistics became such an important field. So in Foucault's understanding, he tried to explain that this level of data that is made available, that the government tries to collect on this population, really helps a better way of governing, a better way in the sense of an easier way for the government to figure out, I'm not targeting individual bodies, I'm not doing it that way, I'm looking at a population level, how are people living, right? What is the birth rate? Do we have enough productivity in the workforce? Do we have enough people of this age? Do we have enough healthy individuals? So the idea is that the sovereign power, the government and the state, is there to use all of this statistical information to help improve overall the condition of the population. So health statistics, for instance, is a super important dimension of understanding how they could actually use this to make sure that the population is like healthy, and they keep tabs on who's able to work and who's not, and also who's able to participate in the army, for instance, and who's not, right? So that's very important for a government to know. So in Ian Hacking's research, he found that statistical data really gives the sense of authority to the government because of its sort of sense of neutrality. All of these statistics help produce senses of like what is normal, what is not normal, looking for the ill, the poor, the criminal, the mad, looking for how people spend their money, looking for how capital circulates, right? So all of this data collection, which became a kind of a important science, and also like an active campaign by the government in 18th, 19th century Europe, right, in order to help the government to govern more effectively. So in the literature, this has actually been compared to the current state of like data capturing and data collection. And this was understood as sort of like that first wave big data, right? Way back when everything is not yet digital. People have to fill out census forms on paper, and then they need to figure out how to sort these devices. And fun fact, in fact, the census actually, that they needed to develop technology to sort all of this, and they want to do it more efficiently. And there was this invention called the holorith machine, and it was actually the predecessor of IBM computers today. So if you look at IBM, you'll actually be able to trace this history of thinking about statistics, trying to create technology for this capturing of data and this processing of data, and how it eventually led to this giant computer corporation that we have today. So when we're looking at the current state of data and the current state of data capturing, we could really look at this history and see how there is a kind of trend to this, and the thinking behind this capturing of data has actually been kind of very similar. And the impetus to capture really is about different ways of monitoring. And now with tech, you can monitor all the time. So this is great. You know, it's not just one census, right? This is now a kind of real-time, ongoing, durational data capture and data monitoring that you could actually do. So here I want to kind of turn to a small example to see how this takes place in mental health technologies. So if you look at this little image here, you see a scale from 1 to 10. So imagine on this scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling today? Which emoji corresponds to you? You don't have to tell us. It seems to be quite a simple question, but perhaps what you would consider a 9 is someone else's 5. So researchers in the psychological field are very keen to improve the accuracy of diagnosis of the psychological states of their patients, and to then customize, right, personalize healthcare for them. And self-reported feelings, right, sensations like the scale of 1 to 10 is useful, but it's not that sort of neutral, right? It's very hard to find that scale that really reflects, right? So these researchers try to think of what other data can we collect, what other data is available that allows us to go beyond a self-reported scale of how people are feeling. So computational methods obviously are very helpful, and you can use that with just mobile phones. So this example that I'm talking about comes from the People Aware Computing Lab from Cornell University. And they have been building various prototypes to study how smartphone usage could generate patterns of user behavior, and then also be used to deliver prompts for behavior modification. So again, there is this big difference here from kind of this first wave big data to the second wave big data, where the data that you generate can immediately be used to feed forward prompts and to already try to modify behavior based on on data collected like immediately. It's this instant kind of loop that you can use. So some of these prototypes include something called mood rhythm, something that targets patients suffering from bipolar disorders. They try to keep individuals to a particular daily rhythm. So they actively and passively track the daily rhythms of sleep and social activity using the accelerometer, audio, light sensing probes on the smartphone. And they will provide feedback to help them maintain a daily rhythm. So like the light sensing probe tests whether this person has been, out in daylight, right? Has this person gone out? Because that would really, or at least for me, right? Like going out into the sun, right? That usually helps uplift people's moods. So they use these sort of probes, which are already on your phone, to do this. Right, no extra devices needed, just your phone. You can just use that. So there's another one that makes use of the microphone. So that is called stress sense. So they detect the stress levels of the user's voice, and then to see how they feel over time. There's also clockwise. So again, the kind of time dimension comes in again. Clockwise, trying to align the phone usage pattern with the sleep pattern, and then to determine the circadian rhythm, and then decide whether this person actually needs adapting sleep habits in order to feel better. So using all of these different prototypes, they developed this app called Health Rhythms. I believe they received a lot of money, like funding from the US health authorities in order to see if they could actually roll this out on a larger scale. So this is an app that is used to seamlessly gather data on people's routines and behaviors, and then offers personalized interventions. So it's quite interesting if you look at the explanation of how this device or this app works. They do things like checking your speed of how fast you type your texts, because apparently slow typing or reduced typing speed might suggest that you're not feeling so good about yourself. So the good thing about having this app is like this continuous monitoring. So the norm that is set is actually dependent on, like, let's say they collect data for 2 weeks, right, to see where your norm is. And if you deviate from that norm, they know that maybe something is up. So slower typing speeds, right? Staying home more than usual, signs of isolation, finding out if there are early symptoms of depression. And they really emphasize stealth modification. So I quote from the CEO, it's to make the interventions disappear into the background, modifying a person's behavior with minimal effort, using behavioral nudges that are as non-disruptive as possible, so that people, before they even realize that they're upset, perhaps, or that they're starting to slowly feel depressed, the app already knows, right? So the app would give them prompts such as, hey, it's a sunny day today. It's a great day to get a coffee from your favorite cafe down the block, right? So this is available because it has been collecting data, right, from the user. It's able to give you very personalized suggestions, because, hey, you get a coffee there every week. Why don't you go there now? So all of these tools are really intended to collect data on this individual and to really give prompts that are so suited for this person that you wouldn't even perhaps notice because it fits so well into your daily rhythms. So on one hand, this is fantastic. This is really great tool. You have less need to monitor with an institutional setting. You don't need to go to your doctor's appointment as much. If there is kind of behavior modification before you're even diagnosed as someone who is feeling depressed or clinically depressed. So these are possibilities that such an app can offer that can really help out with people's mental diseases. But of course, it introduces dimensions of surveillance and collection of data that's we we won't even really notice. And that goes back to this discussion of how it's a different layer of time, right? That on a different time scale, this is happening. I mean, who would notice that my typing speed changed, today, right? Who would notice that I type slower? And would I even be aware that this is actually an indication? But according to the data, this could be very well an indication. I mean, they have scientifically made the calculations and connected the dots with these correlations. So you can imagine with pandemic life, mental health apps are gaining traction, and these types of interventions could be very helpful when we're all kind of stuck at home, in order to help identify people who might be feeling bad. So it's always a bit of like the pros and the cons, and what are we losing, right, in order for certain things to happen. If we're doing personalized health, what are we giving up in order to compensate for that? So I mentioned that data capture and statistics, especially in the domain of mental health, trying to figure out who is the mad people in the population and who is unable to work, right? These are not new aims from kind of a governmental perspective. And the early statisticians from the 18th and 19th century were very much interested in this part of the population. But here, what is really, I guess, surprising or something that requires our attention is this kind of emergence pattern of deviation. So it's the ubiquity and the availability of continuous monitoring is a norm setting that is not just looking at kind of a general population, is also looking at yourself. So this is kind of this layer of personal intervention that was previously not possible. And now you could really go into a very personal way of tracking and increasing the possibility of interventions. And it's quite interesting because earlier, right, it's thought that if we have to monitor each individual being, that is too much resources. We want to study this on a population level. Let's see what happens if we use statistics to establish the norms and then to find out who is then deviating from these norms, and we'll do something about these people. But now this is kind of going back to this personal dimension where, yeah, this individual using this app who has been maybe recommended to use this app actually really gets this personalized intervention, but technology has taken the place of, let's say, the government, right? An organization, an institution that has to invest resources now is automated through these technologies. So behavioral nudging then is a kind of stealth tool that is used in this example in order to help make people more sort of productive or help prevent people from turning into kind of non-productive parts of the population. So this is kind of what I try to analyze as a kind of new biopolitics. So the data capture is really one step away from control. It is so kind of tied together that you capture the data and you can immediately process it and feed forward a kind of response. And that is really the power of this new machinic layer of speed that digital devices can offer us. And this is very helpful to keep the productivity of the population with such monitoring devices, and to think about how to increase the labor power of bodies. And that also goes to the wearable example that I was bringing up, this back pain prevention device, which as you probably know, back pain is something that a lot of us experience. And if your staff, your employees are suffering from that, it would really take away their ability to work in front of a screen, or not in front of a screen. And so those are really technological devices that can help increase the overall productivity from this kind of neoliberal perspective. So the individual has to work, the individual has to modify one's habits and use this as a kind of feed forward mechanism that helps you change the way you are physically. But then at the same time, like the company or the government, the company doesn't have to invest resources into saying, hey, actually, maybe the work hours are too long. Maybe we need to give you more breaks, right? Instead, the device kind of can step in to take this place. You're responsible for your own health. If you're not sitting up properly, that's your problem, and that's why you have back pain, right? So this is, this all kind of leads to kind of my conclusion. I'm going to round up here very quickly. So I'm very much interested in this sort of machinic layer of time and what happens in this layer of time, right? And so I call this kind of techno-chrono biopolitics, because it's a biopolitics that actually functions through a layer of time that we cannot perceive, that we're not actually synchronized to, that is hard to direct our attention to, and that we're very much late always to the scene. And so perhaps this is one of the difficulties that we have to counter, right, in order to grapple with the issues of data capture and data processing and all of the politics around that, as we're kind of unable to feel this, unable to sense this. Maybe there is something there that we need to think about. So kind of to close, we're seeing here now that there is this presentness of technology, that the always live nature of technology, where all sorts of algorithms are already out there in the wild for recombination into different emerging tech. So I was mentioning how these are devices. So some of these algorithms are for your mobile phone, right? Trying to see if you're feeling well or not. But you can imagine perhaps your smart car could also have some sort of facial recognition algorithm or microphone capturing your voices to analyze whether you're stressed or whether you're distracted, right? And that could change the way the car settings are for your driving, right? So like all of these algorithms, they're there, but they're not limited to like one application. They can very much easily travel from one device to another. And here we're looking at kind of the presentness of all of these potential technologies being used in multiple ways. Today it's your phone, tomorrow might be your fridge, right? So I kind of see this as sort of this new clocks of this day and age, this technology, this algorithms kind of happening in the background, and they're ticking, and we kind of need to direct more attention to it, but it's potentially quite difficult. So I want to end this presentation on this classical understanding of liveness in performance studies from Peggy Phelan. And this is quite nice, like to look at it again now. Performance is only live is in the present. Performance cannot be saved, recorded, documented, or otherwise participate in the circulations of representations. Once it does so, it becomes something other than performance. And here, often quoted, performance as being becomes itself through disappearance. So this understanding of liveness is really about the fact that it disappears. But perhaps what we're looking at now is a refusal to disappear. It will not disappear into nothing. It will disappear into our vast storages of servers and machines, and it will refuse to disappear, and it might only threaten to kind of reappear in different forms and different shapes, perhaps threatening in some ways to monitor us or to control us and govern us in particular ways. All right, that is it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I'm clapping on behalf. I'm going to start my camera for a second. Yeah, I mean, thank you for your talk. We have about 20 minutes for questions. I think I would first invite our other panelists to contribute thoughts, comments, questions at this stage. Please, your attendees, please post your questions into the open questions. Maybe while we're waiting for questions to come in, I might give a start. I might give a start ahead, and so first of all, so my first thought is this is really great. Also, my first thought is it's really great to start off the conference like this, straight away going into well, if we are about to measure liveness, or if we look at measure liveness, what is it for, and what's the point in the first place? So I think that's a really good, it's a good start. It's almost reverse to what, you know, I think many which we could have done, you know. So and I think really great to start in this way. So I guess my first thought is when you talked about algorithms and technology sort of in all our daily lives, is that when you talked about glitches, that really in interacting with technology, interacting with Zoom or with our mobile phones, there really is an absence of liveness in the first place. You know, so if you know the technology is all about seamless interactions, then about forgetting it, which sort of that's very different from feeling live. And in a way, I was really interested in what you said about that. The only way we become aware of these is when there's a glitch, you know, when sort of Zoom doesn't work, or forget to mute. So when sort of suddenly the mediation becomes apparent. So in a way, then I guess that suggests to me that liveness really, or I'm really just interested in this idea that liveness happens when the technology fails.
That's a really nice idea. I know that one of my MA students actually right now is working on research indeed on these live streaming of performances and how the audience sort of experiences it. And in our conversations, we've been talking about how like it doesn't matter how well the stream actually goes. Like the audience is really wanting to know, did you really present this to us live, or is it pre-recorded? Because I don't see the glitches. So actually the glitch is really something that is super important. And another thing that we've been thinking about is also this idea of this delay. So actually there is always a delay, but we never notice it. So real time is never really real time, right? Real time actually, there is some sort of mini, I don't know, microsecond delay. In some cases, this delay is longer, but we have not been able to, or like, I wonder if there is something there to capitalize on those moments in order to figure out what could be potential ways to counter or to kind of disassemble this illusion of it being real time, the seamlessness of the technology. Like I wonder if there's something there. I mean, this is still something philosophically like I'm trying to grapple with. Like what are those seconds of delay and what happens there?
And I think it also goes how that concept of liveness is quite different from the way it's often used in kind of well, so conversations around live streaming theater, for example. Again, there the idea is that the better the technology is, or the more seamless the technology is, the more immersive the technology is, the more live I feel. So liveness is sort of equated with immersion more, whereas in I guess in the way you talk about liveness, it's almost the opposite of immersion. It's the realization that I am still in the theater, or like in this room, which happens automatically when, you know, the technology fails. That's a moment where that happens.
I see there is a question.
I'm looking at question. There's a question in the Q&A. Yes. I also want to invite like panelists, if you want to share a video, questions, thoughts, feel free. Darren Nixon is asking about the use of mental health monitoring app and whether that raises and some really interesting questions around the idea of the user performing themselves to the audience. That is the app. The app is built to notice when they give a bad, unconvincing performance of themselves as the app understands them. I'm not sure what my question is, other than does anybody have thoughts around this idea?
I mean, in a way, this is maybe similar to what we are trying to get to. Like it's about the breakage from a certain seamlessness. So if you're if you don't break from your norm, if you don't deviate from the norm, or if the deviation from the norm is very much like a slow, gradual thing, right? Then perhaps you need to tune the technology to see like how sensitive it should be. Like when does it crosses the threshold of no longer being something that is within the realm of expectation, but that you're breaking through somehow. Yeah, it's quite interesting. Indeed, it's bad performance. You're being judged by your bad performance to the app. It is a nice way of like framing this performance.
Could I ask a little question?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Jamie Ward, Goldsmiths. Yeah, great talk. I'm also following on from that previous question that was just asked there from the audience. This idea of us trying to perform using our data, you know, disrupt changing our behaviors because we know we're being recorded. And you see that quite a lot in a lot of sort of different sort of studies. But for the context of it being a live audience that we're recording, some there'll be a talk later on today that will touch on that. Some technologies are not just sensing the audiences for understanding how they're reacting, it's also using that sensor data to then change the performance in some way. So there's a direct performative aspect of that. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that sort of thing, because there could be cases where the audience know that their data is being tracked and that's been used as part of the performance. Or there could be cases where they, so in that case, they might be deliberately, you know, changing their behavior to disrupt the performance in some way. Or they might not be aware of it, but subtly detect it. You know, there's a whole range of feedback situations I think we could have there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, I like, so in your research, like, do you see a very clear differentiation like between the people who are aware that this is going to have an effect, or people who are unaware that there is going to be an effect?
I think it's largely an open question, but there are definitely cases where I think we've all had it when you're given some new technology, you want to try it out, so you overdo things. We're really good at messing around. I mean, even things like again, what that previous questioner said, I found interesting. If you've got a wearable device like a Fitbit, I mean, everyone's got like a family member, or maybe you do it yourself. You've got your Fitbit and you keep telling people you're performing to everybody, you're sharing the data. How many steps did you make today? How many miles did you walk? And if you didn't do enough, you sort of cheat. so that you can, so we're really messing around with the program.
Yeah, I think what your question also points to is, to what extent can we rely on the data that is being captured, right? Because at the end of the day, yeah, people do modify their behavior, or they trick, right? I think there are these videos floating around of people putting their Fitbits on their dogs or on a fan, right? Just so that they could cheat the steps. And I think that's, in a way, maybe the tech companies are not, if we kind of come at it from that perspective, like they're not necessarily accounting for this, right? Kind of on an epistemological level, they assume, right, that the data captured will give the effects that they want to see, and oftentimes in the process of, I guess, in the process of testing out these devices, they don't necessarily always see this like their devices failing, because they're geared to, are you getting like what I mean? Like they're geared to perform successfully in a way.
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Sorry, I don't mean to be hogging this. If there's other questions coming up, please. But I do find this topic very interesting, because there's also this side of it. You say they gear up, they assume that the devices are going to be used correctly. From an engineering point of view, most of the time these devices don't do what they're supposed to do. They don't actually work. And it's a marketing thing to try and say, oh, yes, it does this very well. If you take 15 different Fitbits and you wear them at the same time, they will all give different results. So the data is not accurate. And I wonder how this reflects in your work with the politics of it. Because if we're recording statistics, that statistics is noisy. The data is flawed. It's
very
not
much
accurate.
Yeah. And I think the crazy thing is, like, it's not only that we're kind of governed, right, by these new algorithmic products and what they're potentially able to do were even governed by the bad data that they produce. And I think it's going to take us kind of quite a bit of time to unravel and unpack what this actually means if the data is all wrong. I mean, I think that is also the kind of critique that you see coming from, let's say, work from Virginia Eubanks, who talk about automating inequality in her book. And that one is about how the data is so bad, the way that they design the systems is just off. And it creates all sorts of biases, right? And this is reinforced in different ways. So she talks about, I think, like welfare cases in the US. So she did these like ethnographical research, trying to go to people to understand, like, why is your kid taken away from you? What flagged you in the system that shows that you are a bad parent? And she shows, and she really kind of deconstructs and shows you, hey, you know, you get this extra point because, let's say, you failed to pay a certain bill, and then that gives you an extra point in the system, right? And then other things happen. Oh, your neighbors reported you. That gives you another point, right? And eventually you accumulate so many points. But at the end of the day, the algorithms are just targeting people who are poor, who are perhaps a different racial minority. So at the end of the day, all these biases come in because of bad data. So yeah, I mean, this is of course a very important dimension of the discussions around algorithmic governance in the humanities and social sciences. I see there are some questions that came in.
Yeah, so I'm happy to read them out. So I've heard of Shannon Proksch asks, I've heard of tech to try to improve musical improvisation, specifically eye tracking technology. And when one musician is looking at the other musician, the musician gets a nudge to look up at their partner. What do you think of the idea that one reason this does not help the musicians have a good improv session is that maybe it is increasing the natural rate of visual interaction? Perhaps part of what makes improvising successful might be separate timescales that the interaction occurs on. Audio is fast, immediate, visual eye contact is slow, occasional.
Yeah, this is a very nice example. I think it really goes to the point about how we kind of let go of our somatic experiences and give the power to the technology to tell us when we actually need to do certain things. And I think that, like, the kinds of improvisation and being able to improvise together, it's something that you build up over time, right? You don't just look at a partner. The first jam session is definitely not going to be as good as, you know, after 20 sessions. And I think here it is indeed, right? Why is it necessary to intervene with a piece of tech, right? Rather than trying to build that somatic awareness. I think that there is also a kind of different time scale, right? The ability to recognize things, right? To notice that this is actually a good moment for me to jump in, right? And you build that up. We also don't have actual like conscious awareness of that. Like, this is by definition like what intuition is, right? Those are things that can be trained, and you can be attuned to that through artistic training, I think. And I think this is a really great example to show this discrepancy between trying to use tech to achieve something that you could do also through rehearsals and practice.
So there's one question on whether you could repeat the author and book you just mentioned. I'm not quite sure which book it was, but it was around 2 minutes ago.
Yes, I'll just type that.
I'm happy to share. I think we can share it with the attendees overall.
Yeah. Oh, I typed the answer in the.
Yeah, that's fine. I can share it later. I can share as well. Steph Miller is wondering, I'm thinking about this idea of consciousness arriving too late with regards to digital data capture and processing. Do you think this concept could extend to neural level processing and how we don't recognize or notice this kind of processing until it's already happened? Probably in the brain, I would think. Wondering what this perspective could bring to within body experience of time, liveness without the external tech.
Yeah, I think this kind of continues from the question that I was just talking about with the musicians. And I think indeed this is some, like, definitely neural processing. And I think we have been or at least from the humanities, we've been trying to understand this level of time through discussions on affect theory, trying to understand how we actually experience things, like we have a reaction, kind of a bodily reaction, before we could actually actively say what this reaction is. And I find this quite an interesting area, like with the desire to measure and capture this from a neuroscience perspective, and then also the people who are really into the somatic practices who are trying to understand this from a more philosophical perspective. And I think this is definitely a field where they intersect, and there is like growing literature and research in this domain.
Question from Dominique Savitri. I missed the beginning, but I believe you mentioned the glitch as the moment of appearance of the underlying technological structure. Can you think of how hacking functions as a glitch in entering that moment of malfunction, and how this relates to liveness? Any thoughts on this?
I'm actually curious what kind of hacking you're thinking of here. I think like hacking could be on many different levels.
Probably, I would think it's probably computer hacking. I would think sort of like a code hacking. I would think. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what. I think also like what are the politics behind like this desire to hack? Like we also use hacking. It's an interesting term because it's quite double, because we use it also for kind of quantified self movement, like people hack their bodies through tech. So it's a bit of a double term, I think, in terms of like how you enter that moment of like glitch and how you can engender that moment. And I think, yeah, I don't really have like specific thoughts on that, but I'm triggered by the word hacking and what that could mean. Yeah, I think we can think more about that.
Hacking as an ethos of repurposing technology.
Yeah.
Trafficators.
Yeah.
Perhaps final question for this session from Anonymous. Though there is clear practical examples of how these technologies can be applied, it feels like the aim is to optimize the body, the mind, the person in an almost machine-like sense, so we can deliver and be as productive as possible. But then where is the space to live, to feel, sense, be sad, cry, be in pain? With all these ideas, which may be perceived as negative, avoided at all costs, what will be the human experience after this? Will we only be able to feel what is perceived as good, productive? A straightforward question for the last minute.
I think indeed, like we see a lot of the tech desires to optimize the body and to try to make it like more productive in different ways. And I think like in the domain of like artistic work, we see perhaps this recapturing or trying to push back against this desire to optimize. And we can inhabit bodies that are not perfectly functional. We can inhabit that, and that gives us like extra possibilities to experience the world. I can immediately think of like the research that is being done on neurodiverse individuals, and how experiencing the world in a different way actually makes them, that gives them a different layer of experience that other people are not able to access. And that is actually a beautiful thing. And we also see that a lot with like differently abled artists who are able to bring us into a different way of sensing and thinking about the world. And technology is not the only way, right, in order to create that hack and to create that possibility, but rather I think like that's why I kind of stay in the humanities, and why I love looking at artistic ways of manipulating tech and see what you could create out of that, not being afraid to make the mistakes and to kind of zoom into maybe the glitches, right?
Great, thank you very much. So it's exactly 12 p.m. So I would like to thank Evelyn again for this great starting out the project in the symposium in the first place. We'll have a 15-minute break now before I'll hand over to my colleague Jamie Ward to chair the second session of the day, which will have, I guess, also measurement focus, but perhaps from the other side. So I'll see you all in 15 minutes and see you in a bit.